Yes, thank you ever so much for that. We have now our next session, If Data is Gold, Where Are the People? And I'd like you to welcome to the stage Daniel Wong-Chi-Man, Global Head of Marketing and Business Development of Audience Measurement at Ipsos.
Longest title in the world, sorry. To go along with the difficult name, so just to add more. Hi, everyone. Wow, where's the screen? Sorry. So I wanted to just take a few minutes and talk a little bit about audiences, audience measurements, and talk a little bit more in terms of kind of some of the trends, some of the data that we're seeing, and some of the things that maybe will help you in terms of what's going on today. Quickly about Ipsos. Hopefully you know something about Ipsos, not just about the polls, but we also have a huge audience measurement division. So we've got lots of different teams across the world, running in 37 different countries, 80 odd markets. I'm going to debunk the fact about big data soon, so it's ironic that I'm kind of talking about all that. But what I thought I would talk about a little bit is just kind of some of the currencies that we're doing right now. And what Ipsos does is really an end-to-end solution for radio. We help to run Radar. We help to build different currencies around the world, be it NMO, which is cross-media, or even for the BBC at the same time. So a world in transition. We've heard a little bit about this today. It's not really new. Steve, you talked about it from 2019 at the same time. From radio to digital, from radio to audio even, to smart speakers, listening live or listening on demand. We're in a different world today. We're in a world where we need to embrace different methods to try and capture different techniques as well. And so one of the big drivers and one of the big changes in measurement today is really two things, and it's technology and privacy. And they're having a huge impact in terms of what we're doing in terms of understanding audiences. They are pushing, they are breaking, and they're really challenging us to really understand kind of what is going on. Anyone who has worked with kind of iOS 15 updates right now will know that they're a bit of a pig sometimes. And then you have COVID. Sorry, another COVID slide. But it was the big disruptor. It had a huge impact in terms of how audiences were being measured. Some had to change, some stopped. A little bit of a nightmare for any kind of research company in that way. But what I will say about kind of COVID and what was really good about it is it really pushed the measurement companies to kind of adopt and embrace and think about how to do things differently. And so we've seen that now actually there's more of an embracement for passive measurement technologies. One of the things that we did during the pandemic, so Ipsos has a proprietary technology called MediaCell. This is just some of the data that we had here. Pre-pandemic, this is essentially what it was looking like in terms of audience consumption on a daily basis. So you can see on a Monday, generally slightly lower consumption than Tuesday to Thursday. And Fridays, you can see that typically people were leaving a bit earlier and listening to radio a little bit earlier, perhaps trying to get away out of the city in that way. In terms of the pandemic, what happened? Well, you can see that it really kind of smoothed those curves. So you can see that delay or that change in terms of consumption on a Monday was much similar to Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And in terms of that afternoon peak on a Friday, it really disappeared. And that really makes sense as people were working from home. And I think what we see here actually is the fact that the listening cycle is geared around kind of the working day at the same time. What about 2022? I mean, we are all working in the office now, aren't we? I think it was Lucy who talked a little bit about we're in a new world in that way. What's happened? Well, it's kind of a mix of the two together. So essentially what you can see now is the Monday, where in pre-pandemic world, essentially there was a little bit of a trough. Actually, you can see now it's very similar to Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And Friday, again, similar to kind of what we were seeing in the pandemic. So what does this say? Well, most people essentially are working from home on a Monday to Friday. But generally, what we see is actually that they've built a routine. They've built a ritual in terms of their content consumption habits. In terms of measuring audio, the landscape has completely changed. We need to continue to think about kind of the where, so at home, commuting, in the office. We were talking about cars a little bit earlier. But more importantly, I think what is interesting and what we need to also consider is the how in terms of the device, the platform, or the when in terms of was it live or was it on demand. And so what I wanted to show, and we talked a little bit about kind of digital audio today, and so I thought I'd show a little bit of data that's coming from what we see in terms of one of our digital tools at the same time. So this is from Ipsos Iris. It's a new tool that's recently been launched in the UK. So recently, it's about a year and a half old now. And it has quite an innovative measurement system. Don't worry, I won't go in too much depth into kind of what the approach is. But I just wanted to say that there are 3 streams of data. And I think this is one thing that we're seeing and embracing is the fact that it's no longer just one collection moment. It's no longer one type of data. It's really embracing the fact that there are different streams and bringing it all together and trying to make sense of that. So in terms of the census data or the establishment survey, we get data from PAMCO and Radar. In terms of the panel, we leverage MediaCell, so I talked a little bit about that. That's measuring from an audio encoding and audio matching standpoint. We also get data from our partners Reality Mind, who help us in terms of measuring desktop and mobile devices. And then we have site-centric measurement. Very, very complicated chart, I know. But essentially, all of that data is being integrated with some smart data science to develop a virtual panel or a synthetic panel of about 1 million people. And so the benefit of this essentially is that instead of looking at the 10,000 panel that we have, we can actually extrapolate that up and play around with the data much more. And so what data science is really doing is creating a privacy-safe approach at the same time to understand different consumption habits. So what is the data saying? So digging out just a little bit from Spotify and BBC Sounds here, you can see in terms of general kind of uniques. I think what we're seeing across both traditional broadcasters and stream services is essentially the fact that most people are turning to apps to listen to content. It's not necessarily a new thing in that way. In terms of what types of apps are they using or what is their operating system, it's being driven predominantly by iOS. Again, if you look at the UK statistics, that's not that's not unusual. Half the mobile phones being consumed in the UK, essentially are iPhone. That's not necessarily the same case when you look at Europe. Android has a bit more of a strength there at the same time. In terms of general usage, so looking at streaming versus kind of traditional broadcaster here, time spent obviously is slightly different. You can see the time spent between Spotify versus BBC Sounds. There's a little bit of a gap there. But what's interesting, I think, is the actual curve in terms of how they're consuming. So going back to what we saw in terms of the radio data before, we're actually seeing the fact that their patterns and their habits are very, very similar. So traditionally on a Monday, slightly less consumption. On a Friday, slightly more consumption. I think what's interesting is when you start looking at age. So here, in terms of age groups, this is just Spotify and BBC Sounds again. You can see where Spotify is very, very strong, is very much amongst the younger audiences. We saw that just a couple of presentations ago. But where the BBC, in terms of their strength and where their audience is very much in terms of the older generation. I think part of this is really consumers have built that habit and they're transitioning essentially to the types of content they've had. So something to consider with the younger audiences is really how to ingrain that routine, how to ingrain that ritual. Where are listeners tuning in from? This one's slightly, is not too interesting in that way, but it's just to show a little bit of breadth and depth in terms of the data we have. Unsurprisingly, given the reach of Spotify, given the reach of the BBC at the same time, it's very, very similar across the board. But in terms of understanding audio measurement changes, one of the things that we are hearing and we are seeing is really that there are 3 things that we're being asked for. The first one is really for continuous data. The pandemic really broke things. And so what people are asking for now is longitudinal approaches to understand what's going on in a historic way. Cross-platform. There's been a lot of talk today about smart speakers, podcasts, etc. This is across the board in terms of lots of different industries. But we're definitely seeing that now we need to be able to cut that by different types of devices. And then passive measurement. So the trend to passive measurement is really because it's creating much better granularity and accuracy. So before, where you were asking someone in terms of what did they do yesterday, actually what you can do is actually just measure it and monitor it. And so quite often with passive measurement, actually people forget that it's there. And so it means actually you get a better response and a better understanding of real life as a whole. But overall, for measurement currencies, the need is exactly the same. You know, what everyone is asking for is really robust, credible, and transparent data. I talked about kind of knocking big numbers. I've shown you quite a few numbers at the same time. I think it's important as we think about data and think about different data streams that we go back to this quote here. So not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. Oh, try saying that when you've had a beer or two. Sorry. But it's really, really important, actually, because in today's world, with different devices, with technology, every single piece of technology is giving a data point. But is it relevant? Does it matter? What is the impact? And so something that we at Ipsos think about all the time and something that we say is it's not about the data. It's thinking about people, because it's people who make a purchase. It's people who make a decision, not technology, not devices. And so the thing with big data, the thing with data coming from technology, is also the fact that it can be biased. It's also the fact that it's sometimes unreliable. Not everyone's going to tell you that, but it is true. Depending on the collection method from it, it is not always reliable. So with that, what you need to do is actually try and weight it and make it representative to try and understand what is going on in a particular country. And so what we're seeing across the board is, and this is a trend from country to country, this is just a few examples here, is that actually the way the world is going is hybrid. So it's a mixture of traditional surveys, it's a mixture of big data, it's a mixture of passive measurement at the same time. So you've got, a couple of different countries here, Australia and South Africa being one, doing a mixed survey and passive approach, for instance. But overall, what is the role of research and why is research important when there are so many data streams today is that we need to make sure that the data is relevant. We need to make sure what is the context of that data point. We need to calibrate it so that it is accurate. Because essentially what happens with big data is it smooths the anomalies. And the anomalies actually are the things that we need to know. The anomalies are actually the really interesting things there. And with that, with today's data streams, given the fact that there's so many data, first party, second party, zero party, essentially you also need sophisticated methods to bring it all together. So unlike others, what we feel actually is big data and panels are friends. And so we don't see them as competing against one another. We actually see them as working together. Just like your friend, you might not like something about them or they might like something that you don't. There are differences between big data and panels, but essentially what big data does is it offers that breadth of understanding, whereas panels offers the granularity. It helps to calibrate, and it helps you to understand exactly what's going on with niche audiences. And so, final point, realize coming up to time at the same time, hasn't been too much actually in terms of future of cross-media, but I think if we spin that and think more about cross-media in terms of devices, there are a few things that I think we as an industry need to think about. First of all, it's having a common language. There was a point earlier that was talked about the fact that radio isn't a little box that sits at the side. I think today when people are talking about cross-media, actually, radio needs to be incorporated into that conversation at the same time. Radio comes through different ways. Also, the other thing to think about is obviously that calibration point in terms of how to make sure the data is realistic so that when we're planning, we know that we're actually targeting the right people in the right way and we don't have the Bumble example from before. With that, thank you.